Welcome to the weird and unexplained. Tonight's story is about the incinerated truth. Unveiling spontaneous human combustion. Imagine waking to the faint scent of burning fabric, a whisper of smoke threading through the air. You follow the scent down a hallway, each step slower than the last. You turn the corner, expecting to see a candle fallen from its perch or a smoldering cigarette left too long unguarded. Instead, you see it an empty chair, a trail of blackened ash, and impossibly, the faint outline of a human form burned into the floor. For centuries, such scenes have been recorded with both horror and awe. People have erupted in flames without warning, without apparent cause, leaving behind charred fragments and unanswered questions. Historians, scientists, and believers alike have wrestled with the same central mystery. Can a human being truly combust spontaneously from within? This is the incinerated truth, unveiling spontaneous human combustion. In this episode, we journey into a phenomenon that sits uneasily between fact and fiction, grounded reality and whispered legend. We'll examine the famous cases that shaped the myth, the scientific explanations that attempt to demystify it, and the lingering unease that refuses to burn away. July 2, 1951, St. Petersburg, Florida. The summer air hung heavy and unmoving that morning. It was the kind of heat that made even the shadows feel sluggish. Pansy Carpenter, a local landlady, approached her tenant's door apartment, number 126. Inside lived Mary Reeser, a 67-year-old widow known to her neighbors as polite and unremarkable. Pansy knocked once, then again. No answer. What she did notice, though, was the sensation that stopped her mid-motion. The doorknob was hot, unnaturally so. Concern prickled down her neck. Something was burning inside. When she called the police and the door was finally opened, the investigators stepped into a scene that would later haunt them. In the center of the room stood an armchair, though its cushion had all but vanished into a mound of gray powder. Upon that pile, where a body once sat, were only traces of part of a spine, a few vertebrae, and a left foot still wearing a black satin slipper. No other part of the apartment bore the fury of an inferno. On a wooden table just inches away, a candle sat untouched. The curtains? Intact. The ceiling? Merely stained. Mary Reeser had somehow burned with the devastation of a crematorium. In a room that never caught fire. Fire experts and the local coroner puzzled over the case for weeks. The FBI took samples from the walls from the remains, even from Mary's clothes. Their conclusion was clinical but unsettling. Mary Reeser had died from an accidental fire likely started by a cigarette while she was sedated from sleeping pills. The theory was simple enough, but it didn't explain the intensity of the burn. How could a human body reach temperatures exceeding 2,000 degrees Fahrenheit without igniting nearby furniture? The newspapers called it spontaneous human combustion. Mary's case ignited more than a body. It lit a public obsession that refused to go out. Long before Mary Reeser, before cameras or lab analyses, cases of what we now call spontaneous human combustion were whispered across Europe. The journal Des Debates in 1823 reported the story of a Parisian woman found reduced to ash in her own bedroom, with a candle at her bedside that had burned only halfway down. In England, similar reports filtered through coroner's offices, largely ignored but never disproved. One case stands out: Countess Cornelia de Bondi, an Italian noblewoman discovered in 1731 as a pile of greasy soot. Servants described finding her head and lower legs, unburned and strangely preserved. The wall behind her was coated in a pale yellow film, as though human fat had melted and risen into the air before settling again. Historians would later note this detail repeated again and again. The air itself seemed tainted by oil. The fires didn't behave like ordinary flame. They consumed inward, slow and deliberate, as if the victims themselves were the candle. This observation became known as the wick effect. Just as a candle draws its own wax as fuel, so too could clothing soak up liquefied body fat when heated. The body, in essence, became its own candle. It seemed grotesque, yet disturbingly logical. But the wick effect didn't explain why these fires started. Most victims were alone, still sitting upright, sometimes mid-activity. There were few signs of struggle, no overturned lamps or obvious heat sources. In several cases, the flames were described as localized, a blue or orange glow enveloping just part of the body, almost surgical in its precision. By the 19th century, doctors began to categorize these strange incidents. They noted patterns. Victims were often elderly, overweight, or heavy drinkers, people whose bodies stored high levels of fat, which could act as long-term fuel. Alcohol, too, played a symbolic role, with early physicians suggesting that the internal presence of spirits could literally ignite from within. While that sounded poetic more than scientific, it proved difficult to entirely disprove. One French physician, Dr. Jonas Dupont, compiled these accounts in his 1763 volume De Incendiis Corporis Humani Spontanei. It became the founding text for this strange phenomenon, blending scientific curiosity with a sense of divine punishment. Dupont's writings spread widely, influencing not just science but literature from Charles Dickens to Herman Melville. Spontaneous combustion became both metaphor and mystery, reminding readers that even the human form might hide dangerous volatility. In the centuries since Dupont, science has slowly peeled away the mystery, searching for verifiable cause. Forensic studies reveal that human fat can sustain intense combustion once ignited, especially under controlled airflow. The so-called wick effect has been replicated under lab conditions, producing burns strikingly similar to reported SHC scenes. But the missing piece remains ignition. If the fires depend on external triggers, what lights the first spark? Cigarettes are most common in official explanations. Embers, faulty wiring, small electrical arcs, all plausible. Yet there are cases too cleanly sealed from such negligence. When fire marshals arrive to find a naked flame's destruction confined to a single human outline, logic stumbles. In 1998, British biologist Brian J. Ford proposed a controversial theory involving acetone. Under certain metabolic disorders, the human body can accumulate flammable levels of acetone, a solvent naturally produced through fat metabolism. If those vapors reached a critical concentration, even a static charge could cause ignition. Ford demonstrated this by soaking pig tissue in acetone and exposing it to an electrical spark. It burned exactly as SHC victims reportedly had, slowly, deeply, and cleanly. But while acetone accumulation offers one possible pathway, it can't explain every case. Some victims had no underlying conditions. Others displayed burns inconsistent with even the wick effect, suggesting faster and hotter ignition. Here, science reaches its limits. Physicists, chemists, and pathologists admit they're dealing with edge cases, events so rare they defy statistical analysis. Out of billions of living people, only a few hundred credible SHC incidents exist. That rarity alone means controlled study is nearly impossible. And so, even in the atomic age, the mystery persists. Of course, wherever science hesitates, speculation rushes in. Among fringe researchers and paranormal enthusiasts, spontaneous human combustion is not an anomaly, it's a clue. A clue to something hidden in the nature of life itself. Some theorists suggest SHC is caused by bursts of static electricity, generated by the movement of body fluids in air in the lungs, especially during states of rest. Others claim it's the byproduct of geomagnetic fluctuations, tiny but powerful events that interact with the electrical field of the body. Quantum enthusiasts take it further. What if the human body occasionally experiences a quantum-level chain reaction, like spontaneous fission, releasing energy internally without external cause? It sounds fantastical, but so did most modern physics a century ago. Still others reach for the spiritual. They argue that spontaneous combustion represents the ultimate expression of psychic energy, literal fire from within. In Buddhist texts, self-immolation has long served as a symbol of transcendence, the body surrendered in flame. Might the phenomenon carry echoes of that same mystery, transformed by time into a misunderstood natural event? The problem is, these explanations rely on faith more than evidence. No recorded SHC case has ever been caught in progress under controlled observation. There are no videos, no witnesses who saw the very moment of ignition, only the aftermath. Every theory, no matter how sophisticated, begins not with data, but with smoke. Why do we keep returning to this story? Why, in the modern world where science has explained nearly every mystery, does spontaneous human combustion still hold our collective imagination hostage? The answer might lie in what it represents. Fire has always been both sacred and terrifying to humankind. It gives life, warmth, survival, and it destroys with equal passion. To imagine that this same force resides inside of us, that our own bodies could betray us with fire, is both exhilarating and horrifying. Every scientific discovery about spontaneous combustion feels more like metaphor than empirical truth. The body as the candle, burning from the inside. The invisible ignition triggered by some hidden spark. Psychologists suggest that our fascination stems from guilt and control, the idea that no matter how controlled, measured, civilized we become, there's still something wild beneath our skin. The theme surfaces across culture. Dickens used spontaneous combustion in Bleak House as moral punishment. 20th century horror films reimagined it as psychic rage turned physical. Internet forums overflow with threads of people fearing internal flame. Modern documentaries pit skeptics against believers, each convinced the other is misreading the world. But what if there's a reason we can't let go of it? Perhaps deep down we accept that not all mysteries can or should be solved. Spontaneous human combustion sits at the exact intersection between wonder and dread, where science flirts with myth and our understanding of normal begins to melt around the edges. Despite public fascination fading in recent years, research hasn't entirely died. Advances in thermal imaging and postmortem chemistry are allowing investigators to re-examine earlier SHC reports with new tools. Forensic pathologists now test for volatile compounds, gas emissions, and oxygen depletion at the scene data that might have been invisible decades ago. Some propose that micro-leakage of natural gas into a confined space could create localized ignition patterns, explaining the confined burns. Others are studying rare metabolic conditions that generate high acetone emissions. So far, these avenues have explained some cases, but not all. In Scotland, researchers attempted to quantify the wick effect using synthetic body tissue. The burns took hours to complete, matching the gradual smoldering destruction described in old police reports. Computer modeling confirmed that limited oxygen could produce a self-contained combustion zone, the body essentially consuming itself until the fat or air ran out. This explains the slow, creeping nature of the fire, but again the spark remains unaccounted for. Until that moment can be reproduced or directly observed, spontaneous human combustion will remain what it has always been, a scientific riddle wrapped in human mortality. Perhaps in the end, spontaneous human combustion is less about fire and more about us. About what it means to live in bodies we don't fully understand. Every mystery, after all, reflects the shape of our curiosity. And maybe that's why, even when science covers it in skepticism, the phenomenon refuses to die. There's a fragile poetry in the idea that the same spark that keeps us alive, the electric rhythm of the heart, the chemical balance of cells could, under just the right conditions, destroy us. The line between energy and annihilation is thinner than we think. When ancient storytellers described gods who punished mortals with flames from within, they might have been reaching for the same truth our scientists still chase today. We are made of volatile matter. Our existence depends on continuous combustion, an invisible fire sustained in every cell. So while the literal cases may one day be explained by physics or chemistry, the deeper meaning of spontaneous combustion, the fear and awe it evokes, will outlive the investigations. Because for all our progress, we remain creatures of mystery, driven by forces we only partly grasp. And somewhere, deep down, we all carry a spark that waits, quietly, to ignite. Thanks for listening to another weird and unexplained story. Please like, share, and subscribe for more unexplained stories.